Hello, hello. This is Leaving Hillsong. My name's Tanya, and I'm so happy that you are joining us today for this conversation. And we've got individual conversations, but we're really building just a huge international ongoing conversation. And that's what's so interesting about today's episode is that Michael Bones, who we'll be talking with today, has a lot of very different views on how to move forward with criticisms of churches and bad experiences. And he's got his own story to share, but he's also got a lot of philosophies about what we can do practically on an individual level and on a community level to actually address the issues that Hillsong are addressing, that churches and places of faith do address. And it's a really interesting conversation. Michael's a law graduate, he's a climate change activist, and he's also a musician. He writes songs, he plays in several instruments, and he's based in Canberra now. He grew up in country New South Wales in Australia, and I think you'll find it really interesting, again, the variety of people sharing their experiences from all different backgrounds. So let's begin the conversation with Reverend Bones in the baby or the bathwater. So you're a lawyer based in Canberra now.
Oh, I'm a person with a law degree that does not practice law.
Yeah.
I studied law because I was interested in how society works. And then I realized there were a lot of other drivers outside of the law. And also that my disposition was such that extreme attention to legal detail was something that would probably drive me balmy.
Okay.
So,
you're a country boy by birth, yes?
Yeah, by birth. So I grew up in central western New South Wales, a little town called Dubbo.
Oh, no, Dubbo.
Which was, so it was a really great place to grow up, actually. Even though it was small, there was, strong community there. And I suppose church was quite a big part of that. And that was, the first 19 years of my and a half years of my life was spent primarily there on Wiradjuri country.
Okay. And that's through family, yeah? You were involved in church?
Yeah, so mum and dad both pretty devout Pentecostal Christians. Mum more interested in the esoteric, what I would now call woo-woo side of faith. End times, sort of apocalyptic thinking was featured quite strongly in her worldview, as well as there was quite an emphasis on gifts of the Spirit. And my dad's a little bit more of a critical thinker, but still took and still takes it all very seriously. Yeah, so for both of them, it's been a little bit of a challenge having me start to speak out against aspects of faith traditions that I find troubling and concerning and think need to be reformed. But at the outset, I just want to establish that it's not like an attack on them or on any person of faith. It's really my observations having grown up in a community and a culture, and some of it's really good and some of it's total.
See, I'm wondering what that was like for you as a young man growing up in country Australia, which is so tough. It's got this reputation of it being so tough. And what was that like as a young Christian growing up in that environment?
Look, I took to it hook, line and sinker. So I felt very much at home in church. So again, it was only really later that it became problematic for me in my sort of early 20s. Although I did have quote unquote crises of faith whilst growing up, where the ideas in the Bible that I took so seriously, you experience cognitive dissonance where stuff doesn't make sense, and that's unpleasant. But then you also have a community there which comes around you and keeps you in by various interventions and I mean, there's lots of layers to it, right? So, having a community where you feel like you belong, where you can hang out with people across generations, that's something that's really great about faith communities. A place where you can serve and actually learn skills. So for me, I played music in the band. So from the age of like 13 to 17, 18, I started playing piano first and then guitar, and then ended up playing guitar in the church band. And that, I think, was one of the things that helped me become a really good musician, because we would go with the flow, try to think about atmospherics and, whether the Holy Spirit was going to come today and it was going to be a big one or not was always like, basically, are people enjoying it or not? In hindsight, shaming around sexuality, purity culture, sexual purity, for me, it was also, I went to a Christian school, except for 3.5 years where I was homeschooled under the ACE, the Australian Christian Education. In all these environments, it's right. It's like Christ in every classroom, and learning in truth being like Bible-based and Christ-centered. And so 40% of schools in Australia are private, and 99% of private schools are religious. And those religious schools, like the one I grew up in, again, great in many ways, but, we had just terrible lessons around body shaming, very strict patriarchal ideas of what men and women are meant to do. I'm 34 now, so I don't know whether that is still happening. I suspect it is, because a lot of the same people are running the show. And from the church context, you go to Jesus Camp, and again, people will take groups of small people and whip you up in a frenzy, make you, like the idea of original sin, like you're born guilty and wrong and faulty, something wrong with you. So we're going to make you feel all these negative emotions and then give you an escape hatch to fall into with Christ. And so, in hindsight, those things are really problematic. But I understand more now of the psychology behind it, why it's powerful and why, it gets people in altered states. But yeah, that then also means when you do grow up and believe and start to really grapple with questions of meaning and existence and purpose of your life, and then the answers you've had, the myths you've held, end up falling apart, that meaning crisis becomes, it's pretty challenging. So for me, it led to suicidal ideation. It led to a mission to reattach my sense of meaning, because my whole life I'd grown up to understand my experience of the world as making sense in and through the concept of God. So I can't remember who said this, but it was like, when you undo Christianity, it's not like you're just removing a belief. It's like the whole house of cards falls apart. And so thus began sort of, for me, a process of what I now call worldview building.
Right. And it's so interesting. A friend of mine said to me, and he also went through the ACE stuff as well, and he said, do you know that other people don't have a worldview? They just go through life like.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I think we all will have concepts that we use to order our experience, and whether we're aware of them or not.
When you had more minor crises, you described as did you share that with anybody? I mean, did that lead to, were they cumulative or separate, or what do you think? Like, what happens in your 20s that makes that different again?
I was about 15 when this guy, Michael Petra, was coming to Australia, but Pentecostal US preacher.
Okay.
And I'd been listening to his tapes. It was all apocalyptic end time stuff that Mum was into. I was devouring this guy's theology, and I felt like God was telling me that I needed to go. The problem was my cousin was getting married on the same weekend. There was a verse, can't remember where it is, where, Jesus says, unless you hate your mother and father and brother and sister and turn and follow me, then you're not worthy. Yep. And so that verse was in my head. And so I thought, no, I need to go do this. And then I went to the conference and I got kind of swept up in it. And then he was talking about, God's manifesting gold dust here and blah, 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 the Spirit. But also go buy my CDs and my books up the back, and there's going to be all this more revelation and stuff. And so then I was like, later on, like my cousin came to pick me up with my dad, because it wasn't actually that far away from where the wedding was. And then I just felt gross. I felt like I knew I'd made the wrong choice, but I'd been able to justify it with the Bible. And then I was like, this is wrong. I've done something wrong, and I was mistaken about it. It kind of shows you how fundamentalism works, right? Like I was basically being radicalized before social media made it really easy, getting swept into this echo chamber where it was like, the end times are coming and Jesus is coming back. Got to save people's souls because the planet's going to be done away with. The pastors were called and they came and sat, and there were interventions, and I ended up going back to church and settled down a little bit, kind of parked it and reaffirmed the faith and got rebaptized and stuff later, and fast forward to uni. And I think basically when you're like, my social circle was dominated by church. I went to a couple of churches when I moved to Canberra for study. And then again, I just noticed like the sermons were making me feel bad, like negative. I was having some sort of bodily like repulsion to being told I was a sinner. And then also at the same time, I was meeting all these people, the worldly people who I'd been told were evil, basically.
Yeah.
And people were great. People who had no belief in God were more generous and more kind and more thoughtful and motivated to like do things practically to help the world and other people. And sure, they'd drink and have sex and whatever, but I could see there was a different sort of morality at play as well that I found more inspiring. And I wasn't judged negatively for being Christian virgin, but it was certainly, I was a fish out of water. And there was this girl that I'd kind of fallen for and was really like just trying to figure that out. I basically realized that I'd been set up to fail in life. I had some programming in my mind that was very unhelpful for navigating the world. And also I'd been studying philosophy and and interrogating my beliefs. Nietzsche talks about the will to truth leading you away from God, and that was it for me. I wanted truth, and that was pointing me away from the Bible and away from faith, away from the tradition in which I was raised. But it still meant so much to me that the process of undoing that was like long. And so I was like, I'm an atheist. And then my system shut down, and I had to wind that back to agnostic so I could like get through the day and slowly rebuild how I thought about the world and my place in it. And then other, adventures began. By the time of my 21st birthday party, I remember this guy that I went to school with, who I was a goody two shoes. He came up to me on my 21st party. He'd had a conversion moment to Christ because of my example in school. And it was just when I basically deconstructed and accepted that I wasn't a Christian anymore. So that was really hard. But I've had people burst into tears when they discover I'm not a Christian anymore.
Okay.
I found some letters when I was going through that process from this girl at one of the churches here in Canberra. It just reminded me how intense it was to try to untangle myself from it, and to be like, to go out with your head held high and be like, I'm not leaving because I'm backsliding or I'm like, this is a principled exit.
Yes.
And it took me a couple of years to find the language for it, but I'm like, leaving is moral. For a long time that you get guilt tripped into staying. Some churches anyway are high belief control organizations. Yeah, so anyway, you're either in or you're out. And so people fight really hard to try to keep you in. But then once you're out, that's it. And so it can be hard to maintain relationships.
Yeah.
But, also it can feel big and hard like that. But it's often just because you're sorting through your own religious trauma from the discomfort of having your entire system of belief collapse.
I get a lot of this mail about throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So, you sure you didn't just have a negative experience with some negative people. And so it's not just the fakery of Pentecostalism that has distracted you.
The pendulum swung very hard in the other direction for me. I became a materialist, which is the philosophical term, where because I had such a, it's magical thinking. There's this spirit world and God can talk to you and the Holy Spirit whispers in your ear. It's like magical thinking. And then my embarrassment at just how, I got into law school while believing the earth was 6,000 years old. So it's like, I wasn't dumb, but I was indoctrinated. A lot of Westboro Baptists are all lawyers by trade. This is what people don't realize, is that it's actually got nothing to do with intelligence, really. You can have very smart doctors and lawyers and whatever who are people of faith, people who can have quite a healthy sense of spirituality through which Christianity is their vehicle for that. But indoctrination is not necessarily something to do with intelligence. Yeah, I just didn't want those people to tell me what to do with my life. So I realized I was in charge, and that there were, again, for me, principal problems with it. And then while I was studying law as well, one of the things I did was work as a paralegal on a bunch of historical sexual abuse claims from people who'd been harmed by religious people or institutions. The worst offenders are faith communities in Australia, historically. They are not beacons of morality, and the fact that they still kind of parade in that way gets my goat. And in that 40% of Australian schools, if a teacher is gay, there's like a guillotine hanging over their heads currently, because you can get fired based on religious exemptions.
While accepting the government funding.
And while being a person of faith. And that discrimination is legal. And I don't think enough people realise that.
Cake eating and having as well. Taking funding that would in any other situation be a breach of funding because of discrimination, because of actual legislation. Yeah.
I also think, it's anytime you're just bringing that many people together, things that are bad are going to happen. But the difference is how you deal with that. And when you've got this culture of personality worship and, the Catholic Church, move them along. Yeah. From everything I've been hearing, Hillsong's doing the exact same thing. Again, it's human institutions. These churches, the big ones anyway, are tax exempt businesses. There's some roles that they play that I think are positive, but I reckon most people go there in spite of Jesus, not because of Jesus. And they're looking for community. They're looking for a sense of belonging. They're looking for someone to help them connect with a personal purpose. Like Viktor Frankl in Man's Search for Meaning talks about, he survived Auschwitz. It actually doesn't matter what your purpose is, just as long as you have one. Anything where you can get that is going to be attractive to people. And it's just, churches have, and particularly, the Pentecostal faith, they've got their marketing down, they've got their messaging down, they've got their community building down, and, they're not afraid to say, give me your money.
Yeah, far from it. Tell me, how did your family go with it when you outed yourself to them? And it is an outing, isn't it? Coming out as a non-believer to a believing family.
Yeah. Oh man, it was not pleasant for a long time.
Okay.
A long time. Yeah. So.
And now things okay? I mean, what?
Yeah, I never felt like my parents didn't love me, but it's hard because they're thinking, oh no, my son's going to hell now. So I understand this, again, how the belief structure that they have makes it really upsetting for me not to believe the same thing. And, it took me far too long to realize that, because then I would try to deconvert them with my newfound rationalism and all the fancy new things I was learning at uni and reading in philosophy books and studying in science, all that stuff, which just like bounces off a brick wall, basically, because when your identity is wrapped up in something, and for many people, faith is like a deeply held identity, whenever you experience any cognitive dissonance, the easiest thing to do is to reject the information rather than change your own internal belief system. And so, that was something that just caused a lot of tension. And like, basically, I still mum will still try to reconvert me, or, they'll say that they're praying for me and da-da-da. And it's like, that used to make me really upset because I was dealing with like trauma from the experience. As I've kind of accepted things and grown, I've understood more that I don't need to be offended by that, and it doesn't bother me. And I can just reframe the conversation and say, thanks, I know what you mean when you say that. John Steingard is, I don't know if you know him, but he's an Canadian now living in America, who only relatively recently started speaking out about his deconstruction experience. He had a very useful phrase which for dealing with his parents. His dad's a pastor, which was just like, right now I need you to be my dad or my mum, not my minister. And I think that's a really elegant way of kind of saying, hey, like, we're family first and all this other stuff is second. I used it and it worked well. So, when things were getting a bit heated, it's like, I love you. I know you love me. I'm not trying to change your mind. You shouldn't really be trying to change mine. And right now in this moment, I'm just looking for you to be my parent, not my preacher.
You've felt so strongly about these things that you've gone out and started organising in tandem for change.
I've got a lot to be grateful for. I managed to find a really wonderful group of friends. I managed to learn to love and to lose it, and to have big overseas adventures, and to come face to face with my own mortality and my own weakness, but also through that my own strength to overcome. Managed to, I think, contribute to society in some positive ways. My sort of day job is in climate campaigning and sort of climate activism. So I was very lucky to spend 5 years in this great company that was sort of moving money out of fossil fuels. I've been playing music and I've got an album coming out that I've been recording over many years, which is called Escape from Heaven. And so I put some songs out. One of them, Tycoon, it was sort of references and inspires that story from when I was 15, and that realization that that people of faith, they're the same. So the chorus in that is, I'm a tycoon baby, just in it for the money, the sex and the power. Part of what I'm attempting and have attempted to do over like 5 years is just think about like me 12 years ago, right? When I was hitting the wall because of the harsh reality of trying to figure out a meaning to life outside of God, was sort of struggling with substance abuse and suicidal ideation and not understanding my mind. Like I think about like, well, what would I have needed then? And a lot of that stuff is starting to happen now. Like, people are talking about their experiences, giving voice to the stories, coming from a legal background and also having worked in like a startup and also in non-profits and activism more in that sense. People like us, of which there are many, do need to start organizing and voice our experiences and put that, like, at the end of the day, into policy recommendations that can help religion not hurt so many people. When a campaign earlier this year called Religion Shouldn't Hurt kicked off in the States, that campaign was really just like, film a short video talking about an experience and why you stand with others and say that religion shouldn't hurt. Like, I hadn't really spoken up publicly about this stuff much before. It's not about being anti-religion. Like, people should be free to believe, and great. If it brings you happiness and joy, awesome. But religion shouldn't hurt. And the fact is, there's a whole bunch of people who are saying, hey, this thing that happened was harmful. Here's how, here's why, here's how you might do it differently. And whether that's people losing their jobs, or whether that's really enforcing patriarchal structures and telling women that they need to submit to the man of the household, which then leads people being stuck in domestic violence situations, or whether it's sexual shaming of young kids. There's plenty of ways where there can be improvement. And there are also a lot of people who do still have a faith who are also wanting reform. You know, even in terms of the way mental health is dealt with, right? So like when I was growing up, mostly it was sort of interpreted as like a demonic affliction. You just pray more. And, you know, and then if you were going to go see anyone, well, they'd be related to the church. And so you wouldn't actually get like an independent professional experience. The government in Australia outsources so much social services through religious run institutions. You've got chaplaincy programs where chaplains are going in and, you know, even though they're not supposed to, they're using their influence with young people to recruit them into their youth groups.
How can people be involved in Find Religion Shouldn't Hurt?
We've got a website, rsh.org.au. I think it's still connected to the American one. So we've got to get a little hustle on to and whatnot. But the other thing, I mean, if people are listening to this and are interested in getting involved, like reach out to me as well. So
where will they find you?
I somewhat ironically call myself Reverend Bones. That's the name I decided to release music under, partly as a tip of the hat to Father John Misty, but also partly a like middle finger to the experience. People want to look me up, find me, you can, I'd love to have a chat.
I mean, is there anything you want to say to people who are on those fringes of not sure, I'm in this church, this is my family, this is my world?
Depending on where you're at, right? So the process that is, people are calling deconstruction or deconversion, right, is healthy. It's really, really good for us to think deeply about what we believe and why, and for us to investigate truth and how to find truth. Now, it turns out there's a few different methods for doing that. One is relying on a single book. The other is being more open-minded to evidence and different ways of coming to knowledge. But then it can be hard for people to know what to trust when you've been indoctrinated. So I guess maybe that's a good place to start, is like, well, what is indoctrination? Research that sort of stuff. Have a look at what high belief control groups are like, where it's hard to challenge authority and be skeptical and follow your snout. Fear of loss, and this is just a psychological reality. Fear of loss is a greater motivator than the opportunity of reward. So what that might mean for some people is, I'm so scared of losing my friends here, or I'm so worried about being judged that I won't follow that inner voice or that call of like, something's not right and I need to challenge that or speak up or whatever. If you're feeling led out, or if you're feeling like things aren't going how you would like, you should feel like you have the opportunity to speak up about those things and to leave. Maybe one other bit of advice, that's not something that I found really helpful, and it took me over a decade to even try it, is mindfulness or meditation. The reason why I wasn't into it at all for a very long time is because for me, I thought it was like spiritual woo-woo, didn't want anything to do with it. You need to have no belief in any sort of quote unquote spiritual afterlife, other spirit, whatever, like none of that matters. What it is a way of exercising your mind and your attention and noticing your emotions and creating some distance from your thoughts. So for example, if you're someone who has fear of hell, or if you're someone who is stressed about whether God might still exist, developing like 10 minutes a day of just sitting still. And the only thing that you have to do is try to follow your breath in and then out. You just do that over and over again for like 10 minutes and see what happens. It's pretty powerful when you stack it up over years. I feel like, particularly if you're Pentecostal, right? Any inner voice, you're going to be trained to think that like you're trying to hear the voice of God or pray for someone, and then if it does work or if it doesn't work, oh, did I hear God's voice? Did I not? Like, what? It's you. It's your voice, right? It's your inner voice, your conscience, your mind speaking, which is a thought running through your mind. So, for example, one of my big issues, there's the verse, to think a thing is as bad as doing a thing, right? And so there's this thought policing. Oh, I shouldn't have thought that. I'm a bad person. No, you're not. It's just a thought. You allow it to come and go. Thoughts arise and fall away like all experience does. And that's going to sound esoteric until you sit still and quietly and practice just following your breath and then noticing what your mind does, which is spit out words, oftentimes very judgmental words about yourself, worry, anxiety, all these things. It's work on yourself. It's a very powerful way to undo some of those thought patterns that have been developed if you've had sort of a troubling experience. It is something I'm quite passionate about because
that's all of those heightened states of emotion in churches. I wonder what the impact is on breathing being so important now that we realize do you know what I mean? People would have had all kinds of hyped up states of breathing, and maybe mindfulness is the very best thing.
There's a really great book by a guy called Jamie Wheal, who's a neuroanthropologist, meaning he studies the mind and human society. And it's called Recapture the Rapture, Rethinking God, Sex and Death in a World That's Lost Its Mind. So he sort of talks about the meaning crisis and meaning 1.0 as being religion, meaning 2.0 as being the Enlightenment, the scientific rationalism, and how both of those have sort of broken down. And there's this middle land where people are kind of going a bit crazy because all these old systems of making sense of the world and connecting with each other are kind of disintegrating. I've kind of traveled that path of religion being everything and then disappearing, and then rationalism and science and that being super important, but then it's still not answering other questions or, how to live a good life necessarily. Jamie was talking about meaning 3.0 as being something that kind of blends from both traditions, but that is centered on, delivering that community, that connection, the catharsis that can come from having a place to grieve, to celebrate, to mark big life things. That's super important. And we don't have that. That's the thing, is like religions deliver that. Secular institutions don't really. Wheal then talks about the practices that we can do as people that deliver that sense of meaning and purpose, that connection to others, that catharsis and inspiration. And it's things like breathing being super important, singing, music, movement together. Sex is another one that he talks about. And then he talks about drugs too, or altered states. But basically, so when you're in a crowd of people and the music's going, that's an inspiring thing, right? And so that's why music is such a big focus of Pentecostal churches. When you lift your hands, so even putting your hands up left and right, that's a power pose, which when you're nervous about giving a speech, strike a power pose like that victory, yes, I've won. And that helps upregulate your system to feel more confident. So when people are lifting their hands, they're striking an open, strong power pose. When you're speaking in tongues, sha-na-na-na-na or whatever, that's kind of like a mantra, which experienced meditators will repeat a tone to get into a trance-like state, to then just be making sounds so that it relaxes the mind, so that the mind can sort of like free associate. Layer all that up with like sound and lights, and then this powerful ancient story that puts you and your life into extreme significance. And then you're hugging people. It's basically helping get you high without drugs.
For sure.
Which I think there's absolutely nothing wrong. Having music, movement, like breathing, all this stuff. But the problem is there's then this pivot of like, oh, that's the voice of God. And so now like, yeah, you've had this great experience. That's Jesus. That's the Holy Spirit. It's like, no, it's not. And some people don't have that as well. So some people struggle to connect in that context because, you know, some people don't get chills down the spine when listening to me.
Again, I wonder how much consent is involved in all of those practices as well. So strobe lights and musical nuances that I don't understand. Yeah.
You know, again, Hillsong makes no apology for the fact that they want music to be exceptional because it's the thing that will like bring people in and touch people's hearts. It makes me think of Elaine Debuton's book, both Religion for Atheists and Art as Therapy, pulling at this thread of religion gives people things that secular society isn't, and we should learn from that and attempt to, I think that throwing out the baby with the bathwater thing is like works in the opposite way than some people think, which is like some of the practices and the rituals and all this stuff is really great. And that I think is the baby, not the bathwater. I think belief in God and an afterlife and all that stuff is the bathwater.
I love that. I love that.
So
right.
The therapy, the communitas, right? The like being with others. And I don't know about you, but like COVID lockdown has super heightened to me the desire to be with people and my friends and to have high def in real life experience.
Communities can pull together in a crisis, but we haven't been able to be together.
In all honesty, Tanya, that's like there's only so long that we can point the finger and point out the inadequacies of Hillsong and, you know, these belief systems and these structures. Like, I think it's absolutely critical that that happens, but I think there's a bigger game at play as well, which is like, how do we deliver what they're delivering, or that opportunity to be together, to belong, to have that sense of community? Like, can that exist in a way that is as culturally and socially and personally empowering without the rest of the bullshit? I still don't know. I suspect the answer is yes, and that we just haven't figured it out yet. Like the Sunday Assembly, which started in the UK by a couple of comedians, is basically secular church. They follow pretty similar format. They just sub out the different content. But they've been going for about 8 years. There's been thousands of like chapters that start up, and, you know, like churches, some will start, some will fail, because it's hard. Like, it's hard to, there is something motivating about believing that, having that central text, having that, you know, fear of hell, whatever the carrot.
Yeah. I mean, I'm wondering, listening to you, whether, you know, if you can ever replace those kind of fears that go beyond the grave and hopes that go beyond the grave as well.
Well, I think this is where like death is facing us all regardless. And so there's different ways to prepare for that. And having a belief in a God is that, you know, that everything's going to be hunky-dory on the other side, is like quite a nice idea. So there's been a study on health benefits of going along. One of the defenses that religious people have is like, oh, but like being a person of faith is actually good for your health. It makes you, if you're not having like a trauma response from it, or if you sort of have an abusive idea of God shoved down your throat for 20 years. But the similar sort of benefits could be got from going through secular rituals of the singing, the coming together, the contemplation, that sort of stuff. That's where the future is. And that's also, I think, where people such as ourselves, or the Exvangelical community, can have quite a big role to play. There's that quote unquote doing life together. I know it's a bit of a cringe statement, but it is also quite a powerful thing. And something I would encourage, and maybe this is a positive call to action, is that if anyone is wanting to do something positive or like regretting all this time that they, people have regrets when they've given so many years of their life to an institution and a lot of it free labor and all this stuff. You kind of feel a bit duped. But sure, there's a couple of people at the top benefiting. That's the same almost anywhere in any institution that you work for. But there's so many skills, I think, that come from learning how to like listen to people and to, greet strangers with kindness and being there in a pinch. And it's like, that's the sort of stuff that helps alleviate suffering. And there's a practice there. So the experience is not one that I think is completely lost. I don't know, 10 years, 20 years, whatever. It's not going to be Hillsong anymore, but there'll be something like that that's secular, that's just really exploded. And I think that is just because religion is answering. The reason why it's still around is that there's deep questions that people have about their own personal purpose, significance, meaning, and rationalism. Secular society hasn't figured out how to deliver that, and we're hurting for it as well. That is why Nietzsche said that, God is dead and we have killed him. Our hands are covered in blood. Like, how will we wash our hands clean? Murderers of all murderers. He was recognizing that the death of God isn't necessarily a glorious thing, and anyone who's gone through a personal experience of the death of God will know that. There's moments of triumph, but it's like, it is a challenge. And then on the societal scale, we've still got a lot of operating systems that rely on that way of thinking. Even like a lot of progressive activism these days focuses on the doctrine of original sin as well, which I think is potentially an unpopular opinion that I have, but the focus on things that you can't change about yourself that are the source of your evilness. I see a striking similarity with the doctrine of original sin, that you're born sinful and wrong because of insert whatever thing here. And it doesn't speak to the depths of people's souls. And I think that's what we need to speak to people's hearts if we're going to overcome some of the big challenges that are right on the horizon or / lapping at our doorstep, whether that's climate, whether that's automation about to decimate manual labor jobs, which is going to leave young men out of work. We have to deal with this deepening division in society as well. Yeah, or we get in our little echo chambers. So
the only other thing I think of that you never have to advertise or encourage people is sport. Like, you can get 50,000 people to turn up to a stadium without too much encouragement. Hey, I wonder what else.
Yeah, well, I suppose it's one of the things I have been talking about is and this was on TikTok. I had a couple of videos. I was sharing quite personal stories of purity culture. And I suppose that's something that absolutely impacts women more than blokes. But I just don't really see any men talking about it at all. Yeah, I started piping up a little bit to share some of my experiences. Like I went to go see a sex therapist to help unpack shame connected with, the upbringing. And it's like, yeah, if you're a guy listening to this, it's probably a good thing to go see a therapist and to talk. They'll just ask you questions, how you're going, and then you should just try to answer as honestly as possible. And yeah, I mean, purity culture is a nasty thing, but I think there's lots of really positive stuff happening in that space. And on the gram, that's it. One of my peeves with this is that it's all kind of centralized on social media as opposed to places that respect attention, not for endless scrollings. So I approach all the social platforms with caution. Like, I think there's good stuff we can do and good conversations we can have, but it is, I don't know. Maybe I've said all the things that need saying.
Well, then I guess that's us. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me on here, and
thank you so much for sharing.
For doing what you do.
And doing what you do. Thank you to Reverend Bones for those really interesting different angles that I don't know if we've explored before here. You can find Reverend Bones on Spotify. His music's been described as an energetic indie rock sound that combines flavours of folk, country blues, gospel and grunge. He performs live with the Exvangelicals. You can also find him on Instagram. As he said, feel free to reach out and connect. As you heard, we were chatting at the end about purity culture, and I said to him afterwards, we should really, devote an episode to that. So let us know what you think. It's obviously a very big part of the culture, but how it affects people just isn't really being talked about enough. So do send us a message, and we can talk about that stuff a lot more thoroughly, because I know it's had a massive impact on generation after generation. You may know that Brian Houston went to court this week, and it's been deferred until January of next year. I don't know what it's like for you wherever you are, but COVID has really slowed down our courts, and a lot of court matters have been delayed by a year, major trials, that kind of thing. So it's going to be a bit of a process, and that'll be interesting in itself. And that's it for us. We'll talk next time. Please keep the feedback coming in, the comments. It's all so interesting and such an important part of these conversations and this big conversation. I'll leave you with some Reverend Bones. The songs from his debut record, Escape from Heaven, are inspired by his personal experience of the death of God and his attempt at making sense of the world anew. Please make sure to join us for next week's conversation. We'll talk then. Here's a little Reverend Bones with Kiss My Neck.
The spider dancing with the dove in masks of love, and I want your slave to kiss my neck.